You have handed a piece of your paycheck to your landlord every single month for years. You know his name. You know which car he drives. You have probably never once asked yourself whether the person collecting your rent is actually ahead of you financially, because the math seems obvious. He owns a building. You own nothing. Case closed. Except the math is not obvious at all, and in a huge number of cases, it is backwards. Here is what almost nobody calculates. A landlord who bought a property with a mortgage doesn't own a building. He owns a sliver of a building and a very large, very expensive loan. The bank owns the rest, and the bank gets paid first every month, whether the roof needs replacing or not. What's left after the mortgage, the property taxes, the insurance, the repairs, and the months the unit sits empty between tenants is usually a number a lot smaller than the rent check makes it look like. So today, we're doing something most people never bother to do. We're going to actually run the numbers on the person collecting your rent and compare that to the numbers on you, the person paying it. Not vibes, not assumptions based on who drives the nicer car. Actual arithmetic. By the end of this, you may never look at a landlord the same way again, and you might stop feeling behind for renting. Let's start with the illusion, because it's a strong one. A landlord shows up to collect rent in person sometimes, or you see the property manager's truck outside. There's a visible asset, a physical building with his name on the deed. That visibility does something to your brain. It reads as proof of wealth, the same way a driveway with a new truck in it reads as proof of wealth. But a deed with a mortgage attached to it isn't a wealth signal. It's a leverage signal. It tells you he borrowed a large amount of money and is hoping the math works out over time. That's a very different thing than actually having the money. Let's build out an example. Call him Gary. Gary owns a duplex he bought years ago for around $320,000, put 20% down, and financed the rest at a rate that, depending on when he bought, could be anywhere from 4% to nearly 8% today. His monthly mortgage payment, taxes, and insurance combined run him somewhere close to $2,000. He rents each side for $1,100, so $2,200 a month coming in. On paper, that's a profit of $200 a month. Sounds fine. Except Gary hasn't accounted for the water heater that failed last spring, the month the second unit sat empty while he found a new tenant, the property management fee if he's not doing the leasing himself, or the roof that's now 12 years old and won't last forever. Run a realistic maintenance and vacancy reserve on an older duplex, and that $200 monthly profit evaporates, and some months it goes negative. Gary is not banking cash flow. Gary is treading water and hoping the property appreciates enough over a decade or two to make the whole thing worth it on the back end. That's the part people miss. A huge share of small landlords aren't running a business. They're running a leveraged bet on appreciation, funded partly by their tenants' rent and partly by their own pocket every time something breaks. The rent check you write isn't sitting in a pile getting bigger. Most of it is going straight to the bank, and what's left is getting eaten by a roof, a furnace, or 6 weeks of vacancy nobody warned Gary about when he signed the mortgage. Now let's look at the other side of this. You, the tenant, paying, let's say $700 a month, same as Gary's unit. You have no maintenance calls, no property taxes, no insurance bill with your name on it, no surprise $5,000 repair. Your monthly cost is fixed, predictable, and capped. That predictability is worth something, and almost nobody puts a dollar value on it. But it matters, because it means the money you're not spending on a furnace replacement is money that's free to do something else. Here's where the comparison gets interesting. Say you take the difference between what a starter home would actually cost you all in, mortgage, taxes, insurance, maintenance, versus what you're paying in rent, and instead of spending it, you invested every single month into a plain index fund. In a lot of markets right now, that gap is real money, $300 to $600 a month or more. Run $600 a month at a historically reasonable 7% return for 15 years, and you're sitting on something in the neighborhood of $190,000. No mortgage stress, no tenant screening, no 2 a.m. call about a burst pipe, just a number quietly growing in an account nobody, including Gary, knows exists. Meanwhile, Gary's equity is real, but it's illiquid. It's concentrated in a single property, in a single zip code, and a meaningful chunk of what looks like his money is actually the bank's money that he's slowly buying back over 30 years. If the market in his area is flat for a stretch, which happens more often than people assume, his equity gains crawl while his expenses keep rising with inflation. Property taxes go up. Insurance, especially over the last few years, has gone up in a lot of regions far faster than rents have. Gary is exposed to every cost increase on that property. You are exposed to none of them because your landlord absorbs them first and only passes along what the market will bear whenever your lease renews. None of this means owning property is bad or that landlords are secretly broke. Real estate has made plenty of people genuinely wealthy, especially the ones who bought early, kept costs low, and held for decades. But the assumption that owning rental property automatically means ahead, while renting automatically means behind, is exactly the kind of surface-level scorekeeping that gets people's net worth completely wrong, the same way judging someone's wealth by their car gets it wrong. The real dividing line isn't landlord versus tenant. It's leveraged and thin versus liquid and growing. Some landlords are sitting on decades of paid-off equity, genuinely wealthy, calm, unbothered by a broken water heater because it's pocket change to them. Other landlords, often the newer ones, the ones who bought in the last few years at higher prices and higher rates, are cash flow negative most months and are one bad tenant or one major repair away from a real problem. From the street, both of these landlords look identical. Same sign in the yard, same knock on your door on the first of the month. And on your side of the equation, the same split exists. A renter who takes the gap between renting and owning and actually invests it for 15 years is in a completely different financial position than a renter who takes that same gap and spends it on upgrades to a life that looks good but builds nothing. The label, landlord or renter, tells you almost nothing on its own. What tells you something is the behavior underneath the label, and that behavior is invisible from the curb. So here's the exercise. If you're renting and you've been feeling behind because you don't own anything, do the actual math on your specific situation. Price out what owning a comparable place would really cost you all in, not just the mortgage quote, the whole picture, taxes, insurance, a realistic maintenance reserve. Compare that number to your rent. If there's a gap and you're not currently investing it anywhere, that's the leak. That's the thing actually keeping you behind, not the renting itself. And if you are investing that gap already, you may be closer to your landlord's real net worth than either of you would guess, especially if his mortgage is only a few years old. If you're a landlord and you've never actually built out the real numbers, do the same exercise honestly. Total rent collected for the year, minus the mortgage, minus taxes and insurance, minus every repair and every vacant month, not the good case scenario, the average one. A lot of small landlords have never run that number with real maintenance costs included, because the rent hitting the account every month feels like profit even when it isn't. The uncomfortable truth underneath this whole video is that almost nobody, on either side of a lease, is doing this math. Renters assume they're falling behind by default. Landlords assume they're getting ahead by default. Both assumptions are based on appearances, a deed on one side, a lease on the other, and neither one of those documents tells you what actually happens after expenses. The only number that ever tells the truth is what's left over at the end of the year, and whether that leftover amount is growing somewhere or evaporating into a roof nobody budgeted for. So before you compare yourself to the person collecting your rent again, run the numbers instead of the assumption. You might be surprised which side of that lease is actually ahead. If this reframed anything for you, tell me in the comments. Are you a renter who's been investing the gap, or a landlord who's finally going to sit down and calculate your real numbers this month? And if you've ever found out a landlord you assumed was wealthy was actually barely breaking even, or the opposite, share that story. Because somebody reading it is about to stop feeling behind for the wrong reason,